When my senior brother went down to the mortal realm for his trial of love, he fell in love with a mortal woman. He nearly went mad for her. To save his life, I erased all his memories. Who could have known that when he ascended and regained those memories, the very first thing he'd do was tear out my immortal bone to avenge that mortal woman. He even said I cultivated the path of severed emotions, only she ever taught me what love tastes like. Reborn in this life, I watched their earth-shaking love and never interfered. I watched, eyes wide open, as he, just to be with that mortal woman, ripped out half of his own immortal bone. When Ethan Lee returned from his tribulation, he brought back a mortal woman. A mortal body cannot enter the immortal realm, so Ethan Lee personally removed half his own immortal bone to extend her immortal fate. Ethan Lee's immortal bone was extraordinary, and from then on that mortal woman soared in a single leap. After her ascension, she safely entered the ranks of immortals. On the Ascension Terrace, some gods muttered among themselves, but most praised the mortal woman's good fortune and clever fate, marveling that she'd won the favor of an immortal lord. I only folded my hands into my sleeves and stood aside, quietly watching the two of them, surrounded by immortals, chatting and laughing. At some point, Logan came to stand behind me, clicking his tongue in sighs. No surprise, it's Ethan Lee. Once he moves, it's a love story for the ages. To give up the great for the small, to let the ninefold heavenly tribulation be brought low by the trial of love. It's just that cause and effect answer only to themselves. I only hope he won't regret this in the future. Originally, after completing this tribulation in the mortal realm, Ethan Lee should have ascended smoothly to become the youngest high god. But he forgot his duty to guard all living beings and sank into love instead. I silently clenched my fist. Regret? How could he possibly regret it? This was the destined bond he had always longed for. In my last life, when he underwent this tribulation, he lost his mind. To save him, I erased his memories. Later, he successfully ascended, but once he became a high god and his memories returned, he immediately descended to the mortal realm to search for that mortal woman. Yet 3 months in the heavens are already more than 100 years in the human world. The mortal woman had long since fallen into reincarnation, her whereabouts unknown. He searched everywhere and could not find his beloved. In his rage, he peeled my flesh and tendons and dug out my immortal bone. He swore he would have me buried together with his love for that mortal woman. Tormented until I was on the brink of death, I lay there while he stood above me on the steps, high and distant, condemning me. Not everyone in this world is as cold-blooded and unfeeling, as stone-hearted as you. I once cultivated the path of severed emotions. Only she taught me love. Grace Lee, love is a taste someone like you will never understand. My body was about to dissipate, yet when I heard his words, I still laughed. Someone like me? What kind of person was I? I was born between heaven and earth, and from the moment I came into being, I was a god who held compassion and love for all beings. Like the highest goodness of water, faithful to my duty, I spent countless years cultivating with diligence. I accepted a wisp of incense from the mortal world and guarded their prayers and blessings, never once slacking for hundreds of years. A god who loves the people and pities all beings, yet he accused me of not understanding love. Grace Lee, do you think everyone is as selfish as you? His voice faded together with my vanishing body. Up to the moment of my death, he never once regretted what he'd done. So when I was reborn, I chose not to interfere in his karma again. When he went down to the mortal realm for his tribulation, I went into seclusion to cultivate instead of watching over him. And he, too, got exactly what he wanted. Though he failed to ascend, he brought back the one he loved. He even removed half his immortal bone and gifted it to that mortal woman, just so they could be together for a very, very long time. From that day on, there would no longer be any youngest high god in the 3 realms. There would only be a pair of deeply devoted immortal lovers. The gods, full of sighs, did not dare speak loudly, for the Hall of Severed Emotions held great renown. They only murmured softly. We all thought that after his tribulation he'd return and ascend as a high god. Who'd have thought he'd be so ensnared by love? Elias's lifelong mastery of the path of severed emotions reached its peak. If he knew his disciple loved beauty more than cultivation, who knows how he'd react? Their mutters were scattered by the wind. I silently lowered my head and called softly, "Master." Ethan Lee and I were originally senior and junior disciples, growing up together in the Hall of Severed Emotions. The Hall of Severed Emotions was not truly without feeling. On the contrary, it governed all the emotions of the world. My master Elias was the one in this world whose love was widest and deepest. Master once said that all people have feelings, but each hides selfishness within. So from the very beginning, when Ethan Lee and I first started cultivating the path of severed emotions, he taught us to hold compassion in our hearts. When dealing with others, though there were rewards and punishments, he emphasized persuasion and guidance. When Ethan Lee and I went down to the mortal realm for our first tribulation, it happened to be a time of war. Greed and resentment, profit and desire ran rampant. We saved the suffering and the needy along the way, but in the end, one hand could not cover the sky. Once, he cradled a soldier in his arms, a man who had just won a battle, yet froze to death in the snow for lack of food and clothing. Ethan Lee wept so hard he drew thunder from the heavens. Kneeling in the rain, he raised his head and swore to the heavenly realm, "Peace is hard to come by, yet the wicked go unrestrained, but gods love the people." Ethan Lee wishes to bring peace across the 4 seas, peaceful seas and clear rivers. No matter how many dangers lie ahead, Ethan Lee is willing to go. At that time, neither of us yet had the power to protect the 3 realms, but we had already grown a heart that pitied the mortal world. We never forgot the promise we made that day. Bearing that responsibility, we cultivated diligently for thousands of years. Until one day, when his romantic star was stirred and he went down to the mortal realm for his trial of love, he met the mortal woman Elena. At a palace banquet, someone attempted to assassinate Ethan Lee, who was then crown prince of the Eastern Palace. Ethan Lee could not dodge in time. In that hairbreadth moment, it was Elena who stepped forward and took the fatal blow for him. That day, Elena's blood dyed half of Ethan Lee's body red, and she flowed straight into his heart. In the imperial palace, blood ties were already thin. Ethan Lee could not help falling in love with her. She rescued him from his dull, lifeless lessons in the Eastern Palace, taking him out of the palace to the 4 corners of the world beyond its walls, mountains and open fields echoing with their laughter. But good times did not last. The emperor, under the pretext that Elena was a demoness harming the nation and disturbing the court, threw her into prison. That was the first time I saw Ethan Lee's everlasting lamp flicker. In the Kunlun mirror, he knelt humbly in the grand hall, begging his father to spare Elena. He even swore a vicious oath. "All this calamity stems from me alone. Elena only obeyed my command. I ask for nothing more. I promise Father that for all my lives to come, I will never see Elena again, if only Father will spare her life." Ethan Lee lowered himself into the dust, but the emperor, high above, did not soften. The imperial dynasty could not tolerate a crown prince with a stain, nor a low-born woman who had seduced him. The only deviation in this trial of love was that in the end, Elena was dragged before Ethan Lee and torn apart by 5 horses right in front of him. From high on his throne, the emperor said just one sentence to Ethan Lee: "As ruler, you must reign in your compassion." From then on, everyone noticed that Ethan Lee had changed. He was no longer humble and respectful. He yielded on nothing and used thunderous methods, harsher than the emperor's. In only 3 years of mortal time, he could no longer restrain himself and raised his army in rebellion. That day, he personally beheaded the emperor on the dragon throne. He killed his father and brothers, seizing the throne firmly for himself. But even then, he did not stop. Consumed by longing for Elena, he built ancestral halls in her honor across the land, and searched the realm for women who resembled her to fill his harem, hoping to ease his bitterness. At that time, I was busy cultivating every day and paid little attention to Ethan Lee's strangeness. Besides, a tribulation is perilous by nature. I thought that once he finished that life in the mortal world and returned, he would let it all go. Only later did I realize that from that very moment, I had already been utterly wrong. Time in the mortal world passed in a flash. I watched Ethan Lee's everlasting lamp go from dim to bright, then from bright to dim again. Yet even after his everlasting lamp had gone out for several instants, and the agreed-upon time had long passed, I realized his primordial spirit still had not returned. A wave of unease rose in my heart. Ignoring Logan's attempts to stop me, I went down to search for him. By then he had already left his mortal body. I could not find him anywhere in the Imperial Palace. I don't know how long I searched before I finally found him in front of Elena's grave. His primordial spirit half floated in the air, his obsessions tangled with his soul, half fallen, already showing signs of madness. I reached out to pull him, but his power flung me back several inches. "Ethan Lee." He heard my voice but stubbornly turned his head away, refusing to look at me. "Ethan Lee, I know you're grieving, but this is only your trial of love. Wake up." I thought he would soon let go, but I had still underestimated the weight of his obsession. He slowly drew closer to Elena's grave, and his voice carried a faint intent to destroy heaven and earth. "In the heavenly realm I fulfilled my duty, blessing the mortal world. After entering the mortal realm, I kept the rules and never slackened. They say gods love the people, but why can't the people tolerate the one a god loves?" In his eyes I saw disappointment so deep I didn't know what to say. Elena was his trial of love, but for a god, a tribulation is a tribulation. No matter how unforgettable, it is only illusion. The heavenly Tao meant to teach him how to choose. It forgot that the path of severed emotions is built on compassion to begin with. In Ethan Lee's heart, one person and all beings were never an either-or choice. A god cannot sacrifice the masses for one person, but neither can a god casually sacrifice one person for the masses. He should have lived out a lifetime with Elena, experienced the joy, pain, sweetness, and loss of love, and at last attained true understanding. But because of a single thought in the old emperor's mind, Elena became an eternal knot in Crown Prince Ethan Lee's heart. Elena died, and she died when he loved her most. By then he was already wrapped in obsession, unable to see right from wrong, unable to distinguish good from evil. Falling from divinity was inevitable, but I went and pulled him back. At that time, I had my own selfishness. Most fallen immortals meet a terrible end. I could not bear to see that immortal who had once vowed to bring peaceful seas and clear rivers fall so low. I also felt guilty toward him. Had I gone down to check the moment I first sensed the disturbance in his everlasting lamp, perhaps Elena would not have died, and Ethan Lee would not later have become bloodthirsty. So when his soul was unstable and his emotions in turmoil, I took the chance to erase his memories of being Crown Prince Ethan Lee, destroyed most of my own cultivation, and helped stabilize his soul and calm his heart. After that, he successfully ascended and became the youngest high god. But once he regained his memories, he still chose Elena without hesitation. After flaying me and tearing out my tendons, he still felt no relief and turned his wrath on the world. Logan came to him then. "Ethan Lee, gods should be gentle and resilient, merciful and compassionate. For one person's fault, what crime has the world committed? How can you treat all beings like ants and slaughter them in the name of love? Do you know that Elena was always destined to be your trial of love? A tribulation, a disaster, bound by cause and effect. You and she were never meant to have a good ending." At these words, Ethan Lee only gave a soft, derisive laugh, his tone steeped in disdain. Mortals prattle on about benevolence and righteousness, yet they would not spare a single woman. If that is what the people are, what meaning is there in saving them? "Logan, I don't care about a good ending. I love her. That is our best ending." His voice was firm. That was the first time Logan realized Ethan Lee had truly changed. After that, Ethan Lee brought Elena back to the Hall of Severed Emotions. To avoid disturbing their dual cultivation, I often went into seclusion. But we still lived under the same roof. It was impossible never to meet. One day, entrusted by Lord of Thunder and Lady of Lightning, I was about to go to the mortal world to govern the rain when I ran straight into Elena. Her gaze on me wasn't exactly hostile, but it would be a stretch to call it friendly. I had always felt some resistance toward her. I only gave her a slight bow and tried to slip away, but she called me back with a faint smile. "Please stay, Immortal Grace Lee. I heard from Ethan Lee that you're his fellow disciple from the same source. All these years, you must have taken meticulous care of him, unlike clumsy Elena. Ever since I ascended, I've wanted to thank you, Immortal, but only now have I finally found the chance." Her words were neat and pretty. I tugged at the corner of my lips, then quietly took 2 steps back. She'd been an immortal for barely 3 months. Counting the 10+ years she'd spent in the mortal world, she was only a little over 100. I, however, had already lived for 1,000 years. The way her eyes shifted told me everything about the little thoughts behind them. On the surface, she was thanking me, but underneath, she wanted to probe the nature of my relationship with Ethan Lee. From the start, I had expected her to treat me as an imaginary rival for Ethan Lee's affection. No matter how much I tried to avoid it, what was meant to come, came. Only this life, I had no wish to entangle myself with the two of them. I willingly stepped into her snare and spoke in a flat tone. Immortal, there's no need to belittle yourself. My senior brother cultivated the path of severed emotions, yet still fell for you. That alone shows your strength of spirit. Though we share the same master, the techniques my senior brother and I cultivate are entirely different. There is no such care between us as you suggest. Besides, my senior brother has his own hands and feet. He hardly needs me to look after him. In the heavenly realm, every god is overburdened with duties. We barely have time for ourselves. No one ever paid much attention to trivial matters like daily care or sweeping floors. But Elena was different. She descended halfway and held no position. At best, she was a wild immortal off the official books. She also kept many mortal habits. She insisted on personally attending to Ethan Lee in every little matter to prove her worth. My casual answer only served to highlight her attentiveness. I knew that "I never took care of Ethan Lee" was exactly what she wanted to hear from me. Sure enough, when I lifted my eyes, I caught the look of relief brightening her face. Suddenly, I remembered the past life, after Ethan Lee regained his memories, how he changed into another person. He lingered in the mortal realm day and night. After turning the 3 realms over in search of Elena and finding nothing, he lost his mind all over again. Back in the Hall of Severed Emotions, he imprisoned me, then carved out my immortal bone and crushed it piece by piece. In the end, he stared at me, his bloodthirsty eyes crimson. He said to me, "Grace Lee, do you know what you did wrong?" By then, I was already muddled, crawling on the ground like dead water. He grabbed my hair and yanked me up, leaning close to my ear. "Your mistake was overestimating yourself. You always thought everyone in the world was like you, cold and unfeeling. My Elena is a bright pearl. You, Grace Lee, are nothing but a stone-hearted monster without emotion." Day after day, he whispered those words into my ear. Until in the end, I too began to believe I was a monster, began to doubt whether I had been right or wrong. Only later did I understand. Those who make a choice yet want every option at once are always greedy, and greedy people never choose correctly. I had been too greedy. I had not wanted anyone to be left with regret. And in the end, I made sure everyone was. After that day, Elena never came to see me again. Though she was reassured by my tact, she still moved out of the Hall of Severed Emotions with Ethan Lee half a month later. The once diligent Ethan Lee, who had trained so hard, gradually forgot his duties in the daily warmth of her arms. He was busy helping Elena befriend other celestial maidens, busy tilling heavenly soil to grow mortal fruits and vegetables. They even hung a swing from the spirit tree, and every time the sun god was on duty, the heavenly realm would ring with Ethan Lee and Elena's laughter. Everyone praised them as a match made in heaven. But all the responsibilities of the Hall of Severed Emotions fell entirely on me. My rest grew shorter and shorter, but my cultivation improved ever faster. Sometimes Logan came to share some of the work, sitting in the hall and sighing over and over. I found it a bit amusing and asked him, "Why are you sighing?" He rolled his eyes at me. "I'm not sighing because I feel sorry for you. I'm lamenting that such good natural talent is going to waste." I froze and realized I couldn't refute him anymore. Once upon a time, Ethan Lee's pride and talent were unmatched. He was one of the gods most likely to ascend to become a high god. When we had first become disciples under the master of the Hall of Severed Emotions, his progress in cultivation had been astonishing. Lessons that took me 3 hours to grasp, he mastered in the time it took to drink a single cup of tea. Master often compared me to him, and in time I grew a little resentful. But he only smiled calmly and pinched my cheeks when they flushed with anger. "Is this enough to discourage you? Heaven rewards diligence. I believe that one day Grace Lee will become greater than her senior brother. Back then, both of us had firm Tao hearts. All day long, we only thought about how to benefit the mortal world and fulfill our duties as gods. I always thought we would be as he said. That one day we would bring peace across the seas and truly see peaceful seas and clear rivers. Who would have thought that after so many years, he would completely forget that promise? I met Ethan Lee and Elena again at the Celestial Tournament held by the Queen Mother of the West. The Celestial Tournament is a martial gathering, meant to test whether gods and immortals have advanced in their cultivation. Last time, Ethan Lee had still been able to fight for first place. Now, he couldn't even make it halfway through a single match. Half his immortal bone was gone, and he had neglected his training. His spiritual power and movement were obstructed, impossible to restore to what they had been. He still wore white as before, but the immortal bearing he once had was gone. After I took first place in the Celestial Tournament, he led Alina over from afar to congratulate me, the smile at his lips strained. The one who always lost under my hand back then. Who would have thought she'd become so accomplished? Alina smiled too. Yes, from now on, Ethan Lee and I will be counting on junior sister to take good care of us. I paused, half my mouth open, suddenly at a loss for words. I realized that somewhere along the way, the Ethan Lee in front of me had drifted far from the spirited young immortal he once was. Pressing my lips together, I thought for a long time before forcing out a hoarse line. I'm afraid I'll disappoint you, immortal. The day after tomorrow, I'm going down to the mortal realm for my tribulation. Elena froze for a moment, then managed an awkward smile and offered only one blessing. Take care. Perhaps she had realized I truly had no romantic thoughts toward Ethan Lee. Or perhaps she genuinely wanted to shelter herself behind me. But at some point, her attitude toward me softened and was no longer as aggressive as before. Yet I was busy every day. Cultivating, handling the Hall of Severed Emotions duties, and making up for the vacancy my tribulation would leave in the mortal realm. I truly had no spare attention for people and things that did not matter. After passing the ninefold heavenly tribulation, one can ascend. Ethan Lee had fallen at the last step, the trial of love. This time, I was going down to face that same trial of love. As I leapt from the ascension terrace, I felt a tension I had never known before. I remembered my own blood-soaked torment and pain from the last life, and I also remembered how Ethan Lee had never returned once he became drunk on love. But beneath my anxiety, there was a faint, steady expectation. I wanted to try. I wanted to try for myself, to see if I was really as Ethan Lee had said, cold-hearted, without love, stoned to the core. In that life, I too was born into an imperial family, but as a princess no one in the harem placed their hopes on. Raised deep in the palace, I tasted all the chill and contempt of family. When I came of age, foreign enemies invaded, and the royal clan abandoned me, sending me off in a marriage alliance. That was the year I met my destined one. My trial of love, General Henry Meng. In my final days in the capital city, he burst into my still and stagnant life like a wild stallion. He looked at me, not at my status or the value I could bring. He clumsily taught me to read and write, to ride and shoot. He did not treat me as a royal chess piece, but as someone with 7 emotions and 6 desires. At some point, a different emotion entered his gaze when he looked at me, yet he was bound by reality. He could only sigh over my fate. Sending a concubine to save the nation, where is a general when he is needed? On the road to my political marriage, he made the boldest decision of his life for me. Defying the emperor's decree, he rescued me, settled me safely away, and then led his army to the frontier. It was a brilliant victory. The borderlands were freed from foreign invasion. But for defying the sacred command, he was sentenced to a cruel death. That day, I knelt in the grand hall exactly as Ethan Lee once had. Hair unbound, dressed in mourning white, submitting myself in desperate supplication to the one above. My father, the emperor. Father, it's all my fault. I deliberately enticed General Meng. I am willing to bear the rod and plead guilty, to die in his place. I only beg, Father, for the Meng family's generations of loyalty, to spare General Meng. But the man on the throne only looked down on me with cold eyes. It wasn't that he couldn't see the benefits Henry Meng's victory had brought. He simply could not tolerate anyone defying his imperial will. So Henry Meng had to die. And me? I was only a woman. The troublemaker was gone. For such a woman, whether she was spared or killed was no different in his eyes. Yet he miscalculated one step. Over the next 4 years, it was precisely this useless woman who took his throne. I became the empress of a nation, standing at the same center of power Ethan Lee once did. But I did not treat the people as ants. I did not forget the great righteousness in my heart, and I remembered Henry Meng's last request that I hold compassion. The people are always innocent. Henry Meng did not need their blood to accompany him in death. What he wanted was a world free of war, with years of peace and good harvests. He knew a single woman could not end all wars. An iron cavalry and tens of thousands of troops could. I did much. Outside, I reformed the army, lightened corvée and taxes. Within, I opened schools and founded the imperial examinations. During my rule, women were no longer just appendages of men. They could study, sit for examinations, even lead troops into battle. Once the treasury and armies were strong, I peacefully unified the neighboring states, establishing a truly prosperous age. My diligence had not been in vain. My compassion at last bore good fruit. When I looked back, I realized that I had indeed returned Henry Meng a world at peace. He was my tribulation, yet he guided me down the right path. I still remember his face. He was a general, yet his smile was extraordinarily gentle. Softly, gently, he said to me, "Grace Lee, to be moved is a wondrous thing. Since you love me, I hope you enjoy it to the fullest." It turns out that in this world, one thought can make a god, and one thought can make a demon. And at last I understood what Master had said back then. The path of severed emotions is, in the end, the path of deepest feeling. 3 months later, I completed my tribulation and returned to the heavenly realm. Unlike when I left, the Ascension Terrace was now packed with immortals from every palace, all here to congratulate me. Above the 9th heaven, the sea of clouds surged, light and shadow intertwined, and the stars washed the dust from me and adorned me in radiance. Heavenly omens descended, all of them auspicious. The gods were astonished. Those with shallower cultivation joked with me, "I hear the mortal realm is at peace now. Grace Lee's merits must be overflowing." Those with deeper cultivation praised me earnestly. The mortal world's 7 emotions and 6 desires are a powerful temptation, yet you held fast and never wavered. Worthy indeed of being Elias's disciple from the Hall of Severed Emotions. Logan clapped a hand on my shoulder, beaming. "I knew it. I didn't misjudge you. This is what you were meant to be. Now that you've passed your tribulation, you'll soon ascend as a high god." Everyone was all smiles, because if I succeeded, the heavenly realm would gain its youngest high god. The youngest high god. I paused. A few years ago, that title had belonged to Ethan Lee. Only then did I notice him standing not far away. Elena wasn't with him that day, and his mood looked poor. There were dark shadows under his eyes, and his smile was forced. No one paid him any attention. The once most diligent disciple of the Hall of Severed Emotions had, at some unknown point, faded from everyone's view. Perhaps my gaze was too bright. The gods followed my line of sight, and finally noticed Ethan Lee's presence. One immortal sighed. Back when Elias still had disciples, Ethan Lee was the most outstanding. Yes, he was once the best candidate to ascend. What a pity. Their voices were not quiet. He heard them, and the smile at his lips silently dimmed. A god who loved one person so deeply that he gave everything for her. But time moves on, and the one before you is no longer who she once was. Now, when the gods mentioned him in passing, it was only with those 2 words. What a pity. As I stood there dazed, someone suddenly cried out, "I heard a celestial maiden escaped from the 9th heaven a few days ago. Could it have been immortal Elena?" After that day, Ethan Lee never came to me again. My heavenly thunder tribulation was drawing near. I had no mind to worry about him. One day Logan came to reinforce my soul, his face worse than I'd ever seen it. He looked at me and said something inexplicable. "Elena really did escape to the mortal realm. Grace Lee, what do you think Ethan Lee will do when he finds out?" His question left me baffled, so I didn't give him much of a reply. Fortunately, he recovered quickly. While reinforcing my soul, he also brought news of Ethan Lee. "Grace Lee, it looks like Ethan Lee has fallen from divinity." My pupils shrank sharply. The terror of my past life closed in on me again. Ethan Lee, fallen? How? In this life, he'd gotten everything he wanted. Under my persistent questioning, Logan slowly told me the truth. From the moment I went to face my tribulation, fissures had already begun to appear between them. I was gone. No matter how much Elena didn't want Ethan Lee to leave her side, he couldn't ignore the Hall of Severed Emotions duties. But cultivation is like flowing water. If you don't move forward, you fall back. And he had already lost half his immortal bone. Back at the hall, for the first time, the once proud genius found himself powerless. He had to spend half again as much time as before just to handle internal affairs. Yet no matter what he did, he couldn't do it as well as I had. Panic began to creep in. As the tide of passion slowly ebbed, he finally realized that he seemed to have lost hold of everything. He tried to make up the lessons he'd missed, tried to reclaim his old talent. Day after day he labored in the Hall of Severed Emotions. But the results were far from what he wanted. Where had things gone wrong? They had gone wrong with that half-immortal bone he had willingly given Elena. It was the first time the word regret appeared in his mind, and the first time he lost his temper at her. Elena, if not for you, I wouldn't be in this state. In his mind, he imagined what life would have been like if he'd never met her. He would have successfully passed his tribulation with junior sister Grace Lee as his guardian, become the youngest high god, taken over the Hall of Severed Emotions, and eventually, like Master, saved all beings. With his extraordinary talent and hard work, he had once been the most qualified. Perhaps he hadn't meant it so harshly, but his words only deepened Elena's already fragile sense of security. She was still essentially a mortal at heart. Even after ascending halfway, she lived as she had in the human world, playing, eating, laughing, sleeping. She wanted an ordinary life, wanted to be with Ethan Lee, wanted his heart and eyes to be filled only with her. That, in itself, was not wrong. But the time of gods is too long, and over that endless span, Ethan Lee grew tired of such days. By chance, he remembered his former ambitions, remembered our life together in the Hall of Severed Emotions, and the grand vow he had once made. When he realized how far behind me he had fallen, he put all the blame on Elena. He began to bitterly regret his impulse back then. When he lashed out again one day, Elena sensed something was wrong. She confronted him. "You keep saying you did all this for me. But when your love burned hottest, it was you who made that wish. You said I taught you love. You said from then on, you would give everything to love me. Ethan Lee, you regret it now, don't you?" Tsk. Elena was very clever, but she waited a long time without getting an answer from Ethan Lee's mouth. Later, she fled the heavenly realm. Ethan Lee came to see me once. He did not ask where she was. Instead, he asked if there was a way in the heavenly realm to restore an immortal bone. I said nothing. I only gave him a calm look and shook my head. In the last life, at this point he came to drag me into the grave for the sake of his love. In this life, at the same point, he came to ask how to separate from that same love. That day I watched his retreating back for a long time. I simply could not understand why, even after living again, he was still not satisfied. I had never loved him, yet in those long years I had admired him for a very, very long time. He had once been the senior brother I was most proud of. Yet in that moment I realized that what I admired wasn't truly him. I admired his talent, his diligence, the vows he had spoken, the Tao heart he had cultivated. I admired the Ethan Lee who had once possessed the divine compassion of a god. I admit that the love he spoke of sounded beautiful. But a god's world is vast, vast enough to contain all living things. She will bow her head and weep for the suffering of the world and give up everything for all beings. But she will not be bound solely by the love between two people. Because gods love everyone. The memories of my past life had begun to fade for me. After that, I spent all my time in seclusion, cultivating. As the day of my heavenly thunder tribulation drew near, my heart grew calmer. At some unknown moment, Ethan Lee chased Elena down to the mortal realm. From that day, Logan kept his eyes on the Kunlun mirror, watching Ethan Lee's every move. He was supposed to guard me during my tribulation, but when azure clouds called down the thunder that day, he failed, for the first time, to appear. The heavenly thunder tribulation cannot be avoided. No matter how worried I was about him, there was nothing I could do. 18 bolts of heavenly thunder roared. I raised my hand to defend myself. In that flash of lightning, I suddenly saw Ethan Lee, clad in black, standing outside my barrier, his face dark as a storm. Logan lay at his feet like a rag, unconscious, neither alive nor dead. That scene and the look on Ethan Lee's face were all too familiar to me. In my last life, after he regained his memories and tore out my bones, he'd worn that same expression. In that life, he could hate me for getting in the way of his love. But in this life, I had never interfered. I had let him get everything he wanted. Why had he come to make trouble for me again? I couldn't figure it out, but neither could I relax. Even missing half his immortal bone, his strength was not to be underestimated. And with the heavenly thunder still falling, I had no room for carelessness. At that moment, I could not afford a single misstep. I readied myself to give everything I had, golden light flaring around me. But at the instant our eyes met, Ethan Lee raised his hand to reinforce my barrier. He was guarding my tribulation. For a few seconds I was silent, then realized he truly had no ulterior motive. With thunder about to strike again, I forced myself not to be distracted and focused all my strength. My ascension went smoothly. He and I had been senior and junior in the Hall of Severed Emotions for many years. He knew my techniques intimately and gave me great help during the tribulation. When the thunder finally faded, I possessed the body of a high god. For the first time, I felt power flooding every inch of me, and it was as if a fire burned in my chest. I walked toward Ethan Lee. Now that he had fallen from divinity, we stood on opposite sides. He was gaunt as a shadow, nothing like his former self. Even that white robe of his was gone. He looked at me, and to my surprise, there was guilt in his gaze. He smiled faintly and offered congratulations. Grace Lee, congratulations. I didn't know why he had come, but I didn't tear into him. I only nodded with a cool expression and inclined myself slightly. Thank you. I hurried to check on Logan, but as I passed, Ethan Lee caught my sleeve, his voice hesitant. Grace Lee, today at the Fate Hall, I learned some things about the past. I paused, not understanding what he meant. I saw 2 fate books there that had been altered. Logan governs destiny. The vessels for fate are the fate books. Human lives are short, not enough to fill a volume. Only gods have lives that become independent tomes. In that instant, I thought I understood. He looked at me and confirmed my guess. You're not wrong. Those 2 altered books were yours and mine. I had imagined that after learning this, he would be shocked, even furious, that he would slaughter without restraint as he had in our last life. But he only glanced down at Logan, lying there on the ground, and let out a wry, self-mocking laugh. I know. When I first got together with Elena, I was overjoyed. After thousands of years of dead water cultivation in the Hall of Severed Emotions, for the first time I tasted the 7 emotions and 6 desires through her. That taste was truly beautiful. Seeing her made me forget everything else. What duty as a god, what grand dream of universal peace, they all felt empty without my beloved at my side. But then she died. She died when I loved her most. I couldn't accept it. I had worked so hard, bestowing blessings on the human world. Why would the world not even leave the woman I loved to me? They didn't understand, they mocked me, they cursed me. I'd had enough, so after ascending I went mad. I wanted the whole world to be buried with her, with our love, including you, who erased my memories and aided and abetted the crime. He finished speaking and looked up at me, cautiously searching my face. At that moment, I only felt a great lightness. So he had remembered our previous life after all, or, at least, had seen the fate Logan had rewritten for us. He finally understood why, in this life, I had suddenly grown cold once his tribulation ended. And he finally understood how laughable Elena's past suspicions had been. Elena had feared I would fall in love with him. But, from beginning to end, I never had. There in the Great Hall, I finally spoke the words I had never said in our past life. Ethan Lee. Back then, I erased your memories for no other reason than that I didn't want you to lose your mind. In that life, I stopped you, because I did not want to see you destroyed by love, did not want to see you lose your original heart. In this life, I did not stop you, because I could not bear to see so many innocent lives wasted. Because in that previous life, my compassion had become the blade that killed me. I saw his expression freeze. His lips trembled, his eyes turned helpless and lost. I didn't hurt Logan. He fainted from fright when he saw me. I nodded lightly. He asked hoarsely. There's no way to go back, is there? I only gave a soft laugh. After all that has happened, how could anything go back to the way it was? He read the meaning in my eyes and grew hollow, panicked like a homeless dog. But in the last life I did terrible things to you. It hurts, having your immortal bones removed. I felt it myself in this life. He said, I owe you an apology. I only smiled faintly and answered him seriously. It doesn't really hurt that much. I'd already forgotten. When Logan awoke, Ethan Lee was long gone. I helped him to the bank of the Weakwater River and quietly waited for him to come fully back to himself. He had actually fainted from his own fear. With this handle in my hand, I thought he was done for. But when he finally woke, I found I couldn't bear to tease him. Hey, old man, I asked, why did you save me? For the first time, a slightly offended look crossed his usually wooden face. What, old man? I am Logan, the most dashing, graceful, handsome immortal in the three realms. You little brat, I've watched over you since you were born. Now that you've grown strong, you mock me instead. This old sack of bones might as well be dead. Half hiding his face in his sleeve, he pretended to be heartbroken, while his feet summoned a cloud to slip away. But I saw through him and yanked him back. I knew he didn't want me to learn what he had done. But today, I had to know. He sighed and forced himself to face me, becoming that old, world-weary immortal again. Since you're so determined, I'll take you somewhere. Logan took me to the Slaying Immortals platform. Though gods have long lives, they too must one day end. The Slaying Immortals platform is where immortals of the three realms fall. It was here that my master Elias died. All things between heaven and earth have their own fate. Logan finally spoke. Standing upon the Slaying Immortals platform, he gently stroked the towering immortal pillar. He said to me, though I was born as Logan and hold dominion over destiny, I cannot meddle in every individual's fate. When the time comes, a fate has its end. That's what I always believed. But one day I made a mistake. I listened quietly as memories like maggots gnawing at bone rose again in my heart. There was a child who was born a god. On the day she came into the world, the clouds shone bright, and 100 layers of blossoms opened beyond the sky. Everyone said she was an auspicious sign and would accomplish great things. But only I knew that from the moment she was born, her fate was empty. In the Fate Hall, there was no record of any book of life for her. I was afraid of being punished. Overestimating myself, I secretly wrote a fate book for her. But later, I realized I had done something even worse. The heavenly Tao meant for her to walk her own path of cultivation, yet I meddled in her karma. I broke her destiny, and she bore the consequences for me, ending in a fate of flayed flesh and torn bones. I regretted it then. I had wronged her, and I had wronged her master. So I used myself as the price to reset her time. This life, I didn't interfere with any of her choices, and I realized she walked steadily on her own. She was clever and brave. This seed of high God suits her well. His tears soaked his robe. There was no need to say who that child was. His figure gradually faded. I rushed toward him, but could only watch as he vanished before my eyes, leaving only his voice behind. He had not fainted from fear of Ethan Lee. He had reached the end of his own time. Child, every step you took was a good one. The body follows the self, and the self follows the body. Do not blame yourself. So he had always known how afraid I'd been, in every step afterward, of making a choice. Afraid that one wrong step would lead to another and another. But he told me instead, every step I took was good. After I became a high god, I took over all affairs of the Hall of Severed Emotions. The maidens of the Fate Hall came to serve under my roof. Once deserted, the hall was no longer so cold with them there. One day, drifting home on the clouds, I heard them telling stories together. They say that once in the immortal realm, there was a celestial maiden who descended halfway. She used to be a mortal woman. For some reason, she became a half-immortal. But she only stayed an immortal for half a year before fleeing back to the mortal realm, becoming an osmanthus tree and praying to the moon every day. One of the other immortals cut in. Nonsense. Who would give up being an immortal to become a tree? The storyteller flustered and hurried to explain. I'm not lying. That's how it was. That maiden used to live a humble life with plain tea and simple food. One day, her beloved asked her if she was willing to be with him for all lifetimes to come. She was overjoyed, and for the sake of that promise, she followed him with shining eyes. But later, she realized that her beloved was fickle. Lifetimes upon lifetimes was only a casual phrase said when his love burned hot. It was a lie. So she went down to the mortal world and became a tree. Everyone gasped, clearly hooked. Why? The little immortal maid answered proudly, because a tree's life is as long as a god's. That celestial maiden wanted to see for herself if a god's for all lifetimes was truly that hard. They all oh-ed again and asked, so what happened then? Well, the little maid said mysteriously. Later the moon heard her prayer and asked her, do you want to come live on the moon? Everyone was listening intently when the storyteller suddenly cried out, ah, I forgot the herbs I left boiling in the pot. In a flash she was gone, leaving nothing but a fading streak of light. Those who'd been listening stomped and wrung their hands where they stood. Did the immortal say yes? Did she ascend? Of course not. She'd already been hurt once. How could she easily trust another promise? I say she definitely refused. I don't believe it. If she didn't still hope in promises, why become a tree at all? I say she went to the moon. The end.